There is so much to talk about at Ohio State, and it's Tuesday. Let's put them together and have a little talking Tuesday. That's Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. We are going to be in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center later today talking to Ryan Day, Jim Knowles, and Chip Kelly. And where will we begin, Bill?
Probably a left tackle, I would think, right? Like that is the most pressing personnel question now facing Ohio State in light of Zen Mohalski's injury. And I don't exactly know where they're going to go with that. I guess I'm not anticipating that Zen's going to be available for this game, right? I just, based off the way that injury happened and then him being on crutches afterward, I would be pretty surprised if he's able to play, and not knowing much more about the severity of it other than what I saw on Saturday. So then do you go to the Donovan Jackson route, which is the route they went during the game, obviously, or do you ponder some other possibilities, which is like back to the conversation we were having prior to the Nebraska game? I guess I suppose it's most likely that they're going to put Donovan at left tackle, and then I don't know what to do on left guard, to be honest, because I thought that was a little weird too, to move Donovan Jackson to left tackle, then play Luke Montgomery rather than Austin Sareveld at left guard, because I went back to double check. Like Austin Sareveld wasn't already on the field at right guard. Tegra Shabola was playing on that final offensive drive for Ohio State. And then they just brought in Luke Montgomery. So that just kind of further muddies the picture a little bit. So moving pieces at offensive line as Ohio State goes on the road to play a very good Penn State defense and what's going to be a raucous environment with some pretty good pass rushers on the other side of the ball. That is, I think, probably the number one question on everyone's mind going into Tuesday's press conference.
There are some Tuesdays where we talk about the pressing topics for Ohio State, and we already kind of have a good idea what the answer is going to be for those. This offensive line situation is not one of those situations. We have, I don't know, open questions, no idea of how it'll actually be resolved. I think educated guesses would say Donovan Jackson at left tackle, Austin Sareveld, who filled in for him at the start of the year, at left guard, and then, Tegra Shabola remaining at right guard. That's, I guess, where I would bet that Ohio State lands, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I asked Ryan Day about whether or not he'd want to pull Zen Mohalski at any point in that game. I don't believe he was asked why Luke Montgomery was the one who went in there. He just said putting Donovan in the game was the contingency plan at left tackle if they had to go to it. But I don't think there was a specific question about Luke in there. And it's like, listen, Luke was in line to be a starter in the spring. I'm not surprised necessarily that he'd be on like somewhat even footing, I guess, or at least be part of the thought process when you're thinking about who should go play at guard for Ohio State. But I just thought that it had been established that Ohio State's best 5 offensive linemen prior to Josh Simmons' injury, or I guess the top 6 offensive linemen prior to Josh Simmons' injury, included Austin Sareveld. So then to not put him in the game in that situation was just a bit puzzling. But I think that's probably where they'll go. I guess I can't say I'd be surprised by another outcome because they've already surprised me once. But I do think that we'll see number 67 in there, probably next to number 74 on the left side of the line.
It just seems, I don't know, surprising, puzzling. And this is not, I'm not bringing this up to doubt Luke Montgomery in any way, shape, or form, but what we'd already seen in September was there is a vacancy at left guard, and Austin Sareveld filled it. And that was coming off of a really good training camp where he also played some at tackle. Doesn't seem like that was given a lot of thought in the 2 weeks building up to the Nebraska game for him to go out there and play in place of Josh Simmons or in a competition with Zen Mohalski. So I feel like we have to sort of rule that one out, but I don't know why that would apply to left guard as well. Like he's got more experience now than he did in September when they trusted him to go out and start the opener and play in the first 2 games. So confused is just, I think, my natural state coming out of Saturday.
I think that's probably fair. I'm a little confused. I'm actually a lot of confused by many things coming out of that game. What if you had to put a percentage chance on it being someone other than Donovan Jackson at left tackle? Would you even put a percentage chance on it? Do you think there's a non-zero chance we see someone else at left tackle besides Donovan on Saturday?
I feel like it should be a non-zero chance, personally, because when we've had some of these conversations and to loop it back into safety, it's like, well, do you want to move Jordan Hancock and have him play in Lathan Ransom's spot and maybe have to undergo two different position changes at the same time? And I'm not sure that, despite PFF continuing to say that Donovan Jackson's playing at a really high level, this is maybe one example where I don't know that that is matching up with what I'm seeing on Saturdays myself. And so I suppose that the depth at guard is more stable and secure than it is at tackle, and Ohio State feels more comfortable taking that chance and riding with not either Austin Sareveld or Luke Montgomery, along with Tegra Shabola and potentially Carson Hinsman being involved in this conversation as well. That it's like, that's where the surplus is. And if Donovan Jackson is the best of that bunch and the most experienced and understands the offense the best, then that's the move that you're going to make. But we thought, I mean, especially you talked about this a lot and you asked about it a week ago, Bill, like, is there not an actual competition? Did they not weigh anything else in the week leading up to Nebraska? And if they didn't, then the emergency option must just be the option, the only other option that's on the table.
I don't think there was robust competition for that, because it's not like Ohio State didn't have a full week of practice after the Oregon game because it was an off week. So there was only a couple days of work in there. And Ryan Day pretty quickly, like on the radio, names then the guy that they were going to roll with. So, and I'm not saying necessarily that there should have been competition, I guess, because Zen played in the game against Oregon. So he's just like the next guy up. But I'm a little surprised there wasn't, or at least, you know, the impression was given that there wasn't. And if they weren't going to do it when they had 2 weeks to prepare for Nebraska, I can't imagine they would do it when they have 1 week to prepare for Penn State. So if you just kind of like follow that line, then I think it points you toward Donovan Jackson playing tackle. Like maybe George Fitzpatrick is in that. I don't really know who else would be. I don't think they'd entertain like playing very green Ian Moore in that situation. So it's not like they don't have a ton of like tackles on the roster who you could even consider anyway. I think if you are looking at sort of viable products, or at the very least somewhat known commodities on the offensive line, at this point, almost all of it is on the interior because Josh Simmons isn't available. And the only other tackle you'd really say that about is Josh Fryer.
Yeah. I think the only thing that I can say and potentially report with some confidence is that Zen Michalski is not going to be back. Injury information is what it is at Ohio State, but it was certainly suggested to me that Zen Michalski will not be one of those options moving forward. Typically Ryan Day will say if it is a season-ending injury, he's did that with Josh Simmons, which I thought was notable on Saturday that Will Kazmarek did not have that. It's another situation to watch. But, you know, it doesn't look good. And one way or another, even if you had a healthy Zen Michalski, I'm not sure that what he put on film in the previous 3 quarters before that injury would say that you definitely have to roll with that again. And I don't want to pile on or be critical. Like, I think he was trying his best. He was not the only one to blame for some of the things that was happening to the offensive line specifically, or the offense as a whole on Saturday. But yeah, if we're having these tough love conversations, like, the stuff that he was doing up to that point did not merit absolutely starting him again against Penn State.
Yeah, I think Ohio State very well may have been back to the drawing board on this a little bit anyway. It's unfortunate. I do feel bad for Zen that like he got his first start. It probably didn't. I'm sure it didn't go the way he hoped it would, and then he has this injury that is really unfortunate. So hopefully he can get recovered and has some football left to play ahead of him. But yeah, I think an honest assessment of what was happening there prior to that would have, or very well could have, led you to maybe entertaining some changes anyway. So I guess from that standpoint, I don't know, maybe Ohio State is not any worse off because it perhaps could be having these conversations no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the kind of opportunity or silver lining or bright side that anyone would want to have, because
Right.
Penn State, very good up front, very talented. It's going to be loud. This is, a daunting proposition for anybody to be dealing with a depleted offensive line, which is, I don't know. We thought in August, like, the way that they talked about working through illness and injury, moving pieces around, hey, they created more versatility, they created more depth, they're able to do a variety of different things. That has not been the reality over the last couple of weeks. And
Yeah,
that I wonder why that is. I mean, we could go back to recruiting, we could go back to development, but are they also not getting a clear picture of evaluations for these guys in practice because of another thing that we've talked about a lot, which is like the defensive line and lack of pressure? Like, suddenly are those things related? Like, that's now where my mind goes.
My mind went there too on Saturday, and that's not to turn one pretty difficult issue into one much larger one, but I would be lying if I said I didn't think about that. I guess regardless of why those things were said or why it appeared that way to coaches who were saying those things, doesn't matter much at this point. They just need to figure out a way to put out 5 offensive linemen who are going to help them move the ball down the field the way they need to against Penn State. But yeah, it does call into question a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, some of the things we were hearing in the offseason about the offensive line.
Yeah, well, the great thing about the way that this Tuesday is structured as compared to last Tuesday, where it was just Ryan Day representing the coaches, or the Tuesday before that when no one was available, both coordinators and Ryan Day going to be talking about that. And there, like I said, there's so much to get to. I was like, I don't know if Will Howard needs to be available for this week. I would much rather have extra time with the coaches and the coordinators. That wound up coming to fruition. I'm thankful for that, because I think, we've only scratched the surface here with the offensive line, and, we're a couple weeks removed from what happened defensively for Jim Knowles to speak about that. And I think, how encouraged is he by that performance on Saturday? Because I think that there was still a lot to be left to desired heading into Penn State, and that if Nebraska was even a fraction more competent, that it probably was going to win that game. It had multiple opportunities to do so. Could have even been gifted an extra one, because the Big Ten rescinded Arvell Reese's suspension on Monday, said it wasn't targeting, in which case that would have been a catch, a forced fumble, and Ohio State getting off the field even earlier than it did. But that's neither here nor there, although officiating concerns are not going away anytime soon in the Big Ten, sadly. But set that aside. He's got Arvell Reese back. He's not going to have Lathan Ransom back, I imagine. What does he feel about Saturday, and what does it mean for Penn State? It's going to be fascinating to me, that press conference.
I'm a little in between on like asking Jim Knowles a lot of the things we would have liked to ask him last week or after the Oregon game, and also asking about this game against Penn State, because I really do think it's a unique challenge. And it's not because Penn State is like a super potent offense. It's a good offense. It's a better offense than it was last year. It also has questions because we don't know whether or not Drew Aller is going to play in this game. He injured his knee against Wisconsin. James Franklin said on Monday that he'll likely be a game time decision. Penn State's got an offensive line injury too that it's dealing with, so it's not without its own issues. But Andy Koltonicki, the offensive coordinator there, they brought in from Kansas, just throws a lot of junk at you. I cannot. I would like to ask Jim Knowles about just the preparation for this game and how difficult it might be when Penn State just does so much formationally. And maybe it's not that challenging because they do a lot formationally. Maybe they do a lot formationally, but the plays are more or less the same out of those different looks. I'm not sure, but I'd like to pick his brain a little bit on that, because I think it's Oregon presents challenges for different reasons, because it's got a lot of speed and a lot of firepower, and shifts emotions and all that stuff. I think in different ways, Penn State could be equally as challenging because of all it makes you prepare for. This is not the first time that Jim Knowles has faced Andy Koltonicki. They faced off once prior when I think it was Koltonicki's first year as the Kansas play caller, and they were not very good, and Oklahoma State really blew them out. So I don't know how much of that is applicable to this game, but nonetheless, it's a pretty compelling coordinator matchup. But I don't know how much we'll get into that, because there's also the everything we talked about with Ryan Day last week that we probably should get Jim Knowles' take on as well.
Do you think I'm going to have to ask about the Nick Saban comment, or will somebody else do that before so I can talk about something different?
I think now that the topic has been broached by you with Ryan Day, that maybe somebody else will ask that. I that obviously is one of the things, right? The best defensive coach maybe of all time lobs a shot at your defense. Would you like to respond, Jim Knowles? So yeah, we have to ask about that. So hopefully it won't have to be you. Maybe you'll have to answer that bell again. But yes,
well, it can just be my pet project, I guess, for the
yeah. You're the Saban guy on the beat. Congratulations. So no, we got to ask about that. We have to ask about the stuff about being like when I asked Ryan Day, are Jim Knowles and Larry Johnson on the same page? So and like I kind of put that phrase out there, same page. But then I did think it was interesting that Cody Simon after the game on Saturday used the same words. I asked him about them seemingly changing some things up with the way they were communicating things, and he said, "Yeah, we just want to make sure we're all on the same page." So like how much of a discussion was that throughout the off week after the Oregon game and even in the preparation for the Nebraska game of like ironing out any communication issues that might have been existing on the defense that were perhaps compounding some of the problems that Ohio State was encountering? I would like to ask about that as well, because I just found that very interesting that Cody Simon put it in those terms.
I think that's one part of potentially many, and I'm not sure how many. Like, what things did Jim Knowles actually change? What things did they do differently? You and I talked during the game on Saturday that it felt like there were more blitz pressures. Certainly when they, two of the sacks I think were created by bringing additional bodies. One was by Nebraska choosing not to block the body of JT Tuimoloau out at all, which was a bold strategy. Didn't quite work out for them. But like, how many other things did Jim Knowles feel like he did differently? They had 2 weeks to prepare for that. And I think there were some things that didn't look different at all, whether that was the Rushman package or, the personnel groupings. I really did not think going into Saturday that all 4 of the starting defensive linemen were going to play at least 58 snaps each. That came as a pretty big surprise to me. So some things are not different. Some things are. Was Jim Knowles' view as, intentional changes? How many more could they conceivably get to? Were they working through that and not showing everything yet to try and get to Nebraska and get to Penn State? Like, I think maybe that question is not one that would be answered on a Tuesday. I wouldn't expect it to be necessarily, but like, they talked about making changes, and Ryan Day was involved in the meetings, and he was sitting down with the position group, and Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles were, going to disagree during meetings and then shake hands and walk out agreeing on to be on the same page after that. Like, those were like pretty dramatic challenges, descriptions, or whatever you want to put it, for what was going on with the defense. Like, Jim Knowles is now going to have a chance, I think, to respond and detail some of that. And I don't think, generally, he's not afraid to do so, even without giving away his playbook.
No, I think he will. That's like the one thing I'm fairly confident of is like, I don't know that Jim Knowles not talking last week was because Jim Knowles is like avoiding anything. I'd imagine Ohio State just made a decision of sort of putting one voice, and that voice being Ryan Day's, out there. Like, Jim Knowles, I don't really think has ever shied away from the criticism that he's received since he arrived at Ohio State, and I don't think he would now. So I'm actually quite looking forward to that. I do agree with you. I don't know that a ton felt different. I need to go back and rewatch it still, like especially the defensive side, before I say like definitely there wasn't much different. But I was on alert for sort of like very obvious differences with the defense, and I definitely don't feel like I saw that. Maybe there are things that people with a better eye for it than I have would say that there were, but I don't think I picked up on it. And it was also strange to me too. I don't know if you picked up on this or not, but like we were talking about the Oregon game and how that like the pressure rate for that game was high, but it didn't feel like it. And then I feel like in the Nebraska game, it felt like there was more pressure. And then you look at PFF and it said they like pressured Dylan Raiola on only 17% of his dropbacks. So like that didn't match up for me either. So we haven't really had much of a chance to ask Jim Knowles about his assessment of the pressures generated in either game. But I find myself curious what he feels about both those games and how successful Ohio State was or wasn't in generating the kind of pressure it needs to get.
Yeah. Eventually, you and I just need to. We're talking about PFF grades more than we ever have on the podcast, because we're trying to figure out some of the things that are going on. We need to be. I don't know where their headquarters are. We need to be able to go out there and go behind the scenes with who's scoring this and how and why, because I think there's multiple examples from the last 2 games that just I'm looking at the numbers and getting prepared to talk about it on the show or anywhere else, and it's like, I don't know that I can use this to illustrate a point, because that's not what I saw.
Yeah, it's a little strange. I guess the one thing that had happened in that game that was backed up by the numbers that I saw on PFF was how how often Nebraska was throwing screens, which helped
Yeah.
generate the 13 tackles for loss that Ohio State had. Like that number, I don't want to say it's misleading because like Ohio State made those plays, right? And Nebraska was trying to dial up screens, and almost every single one of them, maybe every single one of them, Ohio State just like smothered and like
Yeah.
nothing happened on them. So that is a credit to Ohio State's defense. I just say that to point out that if you're someone who was like, boy, they should generate more tackles for loss and sacks, and you look at that box score and see 13 tackles for loss, they're not the kind you're thinking of. they're
No.
different. They're different different kinds of TFLs. They're impactful nonetheless, but it wasn't like the defensive line living in Nebraska's backfield, which I think is more of what we were trying to get at when we were talking about those things.
Well, and that's why I always say, and I make the point, it's like, well, you have the box score. You can't use that solely to describe the game. Let's put some extra context on it with PFF numbers. And it's like, well, guess what? They failed in this case too. Like a 3-sack, 13 tackle for loss game. It wasn't that good in terms of Ohio State generating pressure. I think one thing we can all agree on, they put 0 hits on Dylan Raiola in the pocket. I agree with PFF's numerical calculations there. But I thought that they were closer to getting home to him than maybe they were against Oregon. But like that's Jim Knowles' assessment of that, I think, is going to be fascinating because when Nebraska went to traditional passing game, I did not think that Dylan Raiola was under tremendous duress. And the missed throws that he made, I couldn't believe them. Like they were so open and could have been so detrimental to Ohio State that like I feel more than anything like the Silver Bullets dodged a bullet on Saturday than rather like, the ball just didn't quite bounce Nebraska's way. Like they missed opportunities to pull the upset that I don't think Ohio State's defense actually did enough to cause.
And I think Jim Knowles will maybe acknowledge that fact, right? He typically has in the past when we've tried to give him his flowers for a good defensive game. He'll say, yeah, but this, and this. So I think maybe he'll have a more honest assessment of what that was, maybe than even Ryan Day did in the immediate aftermath of the game.
Yeah, I think you're right. We'll find out. What would you like to ask Chip Kelly in the non-offensive line variety?
Can I hit you with some numbers?
Yeah, hit me with them.
So there were those back-to-back plays against Oregon where TreVeyon Henderson had the 2 long runs that combined for 70 yards.
Oh boy, I don't like where this is going.
And I always hate these things, like if you take those out, like they happen. But aside from those 2 runs in the last 2 games, 62 carries for 135 yards for an average of 2.2 yards per carry. I have more. That's sorry. There's
bad start. All right.
Here is Ohio. So stuff rate is the percentage of runs that are stopped at or behind the line of scrimmage. Here is Ohio State's stuff rate allowed by game. 12%, 10%, 12%, 17%, 12%. And now we're at the Oregon game, 25%. And in the Nebraska game, 38, almost 39%. Since Ryan Day has been the head coach, that stuff rate is the 3rd highest they've allowed in any single game. There is another statistic that Sports Info Solutions has, which is the number of runs where you're just hit at the line of scrimmage. Doesn't necessarily mean you were stopped there, but you are hit by a defender at the line of scrimmage. Every game Ryan Day's coached since 2019, the Oregon game is the 4th highest percentage of runs that were hit by the line, and the Nebraska game is the 5th highest. I don't know what's happened to the run game. Like I'm a little stunned by what I've seen the last 2 weeks. And maybe part of that is me being too high on it to begin with. I'm certainly willing to admit that because I definitely was very high on the run game, as people who listen to this show know. But I thought at the very least we'd get an improved run game from Ohio State. And for much of the season, we've seen that. And the last 2 games, I feel like we've seen an alarming regression to what all of last year felt like when Ohio State did not run the ball well enough. And I agree with anybody who thinks that Ohio State tried to run it too much against Nebraska. That many runs and only 16 pass attempts in a game where you can't run the ball is kind of weird. But I don't care if even if this becomes a more passing oriented team, it still has to run the ball better. So what's on Chip Kelly's mind as it pertains to the rushing game struggles is what I'd like to ask him.
Whew, that's the Will Kazmarek effect, clearly.
Maybe it's part of it. Yeah.
Which
Offensive line, Will Kazmarek. I think the running backs have been worse the last two games too, just with like vision and kind of fighting through some stuff. It's like it's just the whole operation's been pretty bad the last two games.
Yeah, I bring that up half joking, maybe less than half, maybe 3/4 fully serious that that's your best overall tight end. And there were times on Saturday that you were sitting there and you were pointing out some missed assignments, some missed blocks, and miscommunication. I don't know, all of the above for tight ends with their help in the run game, and also wondering why they weren't being used to help in pass protection some more. And all of that then goes into another conversation with Chip Kelly about the value of RPO and Will Howard as a rushing threat, what that can help to maybe alleviate some of those concerns for Ohio State. Also just using the RPOs to boost the passing attack, which I think I didn't really understand the overall game plan when I'm maybe never supposed to understand it at a level that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day do, because they're two of the best, been proven year after year that they are some of the most respected offensive minds in the country. I think they know what they're doing, but I didn't really follow. It didn't track for me as well on Saturday as I thought it would. And again, maybe they thought they would just get through Nebraska without having to dip too much into the arsenal, and you can save some stuff up for Penn State, which is a bigger matchup game and on the road and all that other stuff. Like, boy, I hope for Ohio State's case that is what was happening, because there was a lot of meat left off the bone, even when you had successful downfield passing attack. And like Nebraska clearly could not cover Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith. We don't really know because Emeka only touched it 3 times, but like they were not going to have a solution to that. Nobody is. And I thought there was like a point in the third quarter where Ryan Day asked for a play sheet, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's gonna take this over. He's upset, and he didn't. Quinn Temple finally took it back from him, but like, I did not think that was. We've talked so much about the defense, and never considered there'd be a game where it's like Chip Kelly and Ryan Day. They didn't have it today. That was more troubling than anything I might have seen.
Yeah, I guess it could, because I actually thought Chip called a pretty good game against Oregon. Like the rushing inefficiencies, like aside, like I think that the struggles to run the ball, especially in the second half of that game, I think were largely like a personnel thing and mostly like an offensive line thing with the injuries they were dealing with. But I liked a lot of what Chip brought to the table against Oregon. And this Penn State game is a similar matchup game with a really good defense that just requires a lot of your thoughts and preparation. So if the Nebraska game was like a weird in between where maybe you didn't, allot the same kind of brain power to that game, and while also Nebraska's defense is being pretty good, maybe that explains some of it. I just know that they were definitely off with the calls. It seemed like just like the plan in general against Nebraska, and then even with that, the way it was run wasn't all that good either. But that was kind of the first time for me that I was like, what's up with the offense? The offense just seems really out of sorts. Yeah. So I don't know that I'm worried about it being a long-term thing, but the rushing issues now is a 2-game thing. And some of it might be call based, to your point. Some of it might be quarterback runs, RPOs, all that stuff could help. And some of it obviously is also personnel driven, but whatever it is, like, they have to figure it out, because Ohio State's not going to go through the rest of this season unscathed if it's running the ball for 60 yards a game and 2 yards a pop.
Yeah. Well, I think we could probably rattle off about 100 more questions for Ohio State, but those are the big ones. We're going to start there, and then we'll work back and see what else we learn later on Tuesday in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center on some snap judgments. And then we'll be back, of course, with more. I don't know if stocks are going to be happening on the Wednesday version of the podcast daily. It might not be a right time to invest, but who knows? We'll figure that out when we get there. But that's what we're looking forward to learning from Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, and Jim Knowles. We'll have a stream up on the podcast on the YouTube channel of that press conference with the 2 coordinators and the head coach of the Buckeyes, getting ready for Saturday's massive showdown at Penn State, where the Buckeyes are still favored. So busy week ahead, and it's going to be a fascinating press conference. I'll be there with Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham as well. Thanks for joining us on the podcast daily. It's Talking Tuesday. I'm Austin. So long.